evening, friends. In fact, 2 weeks back, we started the discussion on DPDPA Rules 2025. But in that one session, we were not able to complete the discussion and we had to uh, postpone further discussions. Subsequently, we had one more guest speaker who also spoke on DPDPA rules. And anyway, this weekend, we are having some more discussions. So therefore, Manju has felt that we should complete our obligation to discuss the rest of the rules which we could not discuss on the other day. Okay. Now, last time when we discussed up to rule number 5. We discussed the act in general, and then we went into the rules, and basically we spoke about the consent and notice and the consent manager. By that time, our time was exhausted. Now we will try to spend time on the remaining rules as proposed by the government. So what we are trying to do is to just understand the rules in the context of the act. And in case we have any thoughts about any need for a comment or modification which is absolutely required, we can put it in the recommendations which we have to submit before February 18th. I am not expecting any extension of the date. In fact, when we met the ministry people last week here in Bangalore, they confirmed that they had already received more than 6,000 comments. So I don't feel there is any necessity for extending the time further. So February 18th will be the last date. Before that, we also have to submit a comment. Others can submit their own comment. So we are trying to understand this better. With that purpose, let's have a discussion. See, one of the things which we can always discuss is the sectoral implication of the act. And if any sectoral difficulties are there, the associations related to that sector have to take up and then represent to the ministry, either now when the rules are being discussed or later. But my own expectation is that the rules are subordinate to the act, and act, even the ministry cannot make any changes now. So what the government can do in terms of rules must be considered as limited. We should not expect the rules to actually bring so many new things and then perhaps give checklist line by line so that industries can adopt it just like that. In fact, that is why we need to develop our own jurisprudence on how to interpret the act, and to that, whatever the rules to add. So that is the limited objective with which we have to look at the rules. So let me go straight away to rule number 6. Okay, rule number 5. We can come back to the other rules in case people have any questions. Okay, now this rule number 5 relates to what the government calls as standards, okay, for processing. Basically, there are a couple of sections where the government has been given exemption from collecting consent or to process personal data without specific consent under section 17. And in that context, this rule states that there is a need to follow certain privacy principles. That is what they call as standards. And these are the same kind of privacy principles which we normally discuss in GDPR and other things, like there should be lawful processing, purpose-specific processing, data minimization, accuracy, and minimization of data retention, then reasonable security safeguards. These are the things which are called standards. Nothing new except that the rules adopt what is generally understood as the privacy principle. Okay. Now, this is the details which I just explained. Processing is carried out in a lawful manner, and processing is limited to the particular purpose. Then reasonable efforts should be made to ensure accuracy. And then in case of mm, retention, it has to be retained only to the extent the purpose requires, except where there are other laws. Then reasonable security safeguards, which we will discuss separately. There is a separate rule on reasonable security safeguards. In fact, this has been a point of discussion in many of the seminars which we attended, because the information security people immediately recognize that this really tries to provide them some kind of indication about the information security requirements. In fact, if you see in DGPSI also, we have set aside some 8 implementation specifications related to the information security. So here, these, whatever I am now showing, about 6 different points, are mentioned as things which needs to be taken note of with reference to securing the personal information. See, what we need to understand in a corporate scenario is we are already implementing a lot of information security safeguards, basically because many of us are ISO 27001 compliant. So we may have all these kind of safeguards like encryption, masking, access control, log monitoring, business continuity, unauthorized access detection, which also you may say extends to the antivirus control, contractual binding of data processors, then other technical and organizational measures where you can bring various other information security requirements, including updations to software, patching, and so on. So this Rule 6 is a kind of a reminder to the industry that these security safeguards with which you are already familiar are also relevant for personal information protection. But in this context, what I normally suggest is that we are looking at the personal data which comes under DPDPA 2023 in terms of the scope of the law, which is what I call as DPDPA protected personal data. Okay, like we call some data under HIPAA as protected health information. Okay, all personal information under HIPAA is not protected health information. Protected health information has got a specific definition. Likewise, under DPDPA, all personal information may not be coming within the scope of the DPDPA 2023. One example is personal data processed by an individual for a domestic purpose. Another could be personal data which is made public by the person. See, these are all personal data, but if you ask me, is DPDPA applicable? I have to say, no, it is not applicable. Why it is not applicable? There is a specific provision to say it is not applicable. When it is not applicable, it is somewhat like other data which is taken out of the system. In addition to this, under legitimate use criteria, there is the provision that consent is not required in certain cases, for example, when information is voluntarily given. But even in those cases, rest of the provisions of the Act, such as security and other things, data breach notification may remain. So there are 2 classes of personal data. One class of personal data to which DPDPA protection is not available at all. Another class of data where consent is not necessary, or establishing the legal basis will be through the legitimate use basis. But rest of the restrictions or provisions, including say cross-border transfer, if it is introduced, they may all be applicable. So we have to look at the classification of data first as personal data and non-personal data, and within personal data which comes within DPDPA and not under DPDPA, and then go into other sub-classifications like minors data, employee data, and so on. Because employee data comes under legitimate use, minors data requires parental consent, and so on. So this is how we look at personal data for DPDPA purpose. And this reasonable security safeguards under Rule 6 is applicable for what I call as the DPDPA protected data. Now, if an organization already has an information security policy and is protecting all its data through a set of policies, now whether the same policies will be sufficient for protecting this DPDPA protected data, or you need to actually create a supplementary policy is something which you need to decide. But if you decide to look at a supplementary policy, apart from encryption, obfuscation or masking or use of virtual tokens is one of the suggested methods which can be called as an important security practice. Okay. Now, maybe we will go into a discussion of this. When we say access control, now in the case of information security, access control is determined in the interest of the organization, mostly by the CISO. Now, in the case of DPDPA, access control has to be dovetailed to the permissions given by the data principal, because data principal is the ultimate boss as far as the data is concerned. And even the DPO or the CIO who structures the access control regulations needs to keep in mind that he cannot give access control outside the permissions which have been given by the data principal. The exception, of course, is there when there is a legitimate use requirement, when perhaps the organization has to specify that this legitimate use means that we can provide, say, access in this particular context, which is not exactly included in the explicit consent, but that access has to be given only to such persons to whom this legitimate use has got a particular, say, requirement. For example, if legitimate use we are using is for employment purposes, then only the HR department can use the access control other than the specific explicit consent. Similarly, if the legitimate use is for medical emergency, then whoever in the organization is responsible for that medical emergency handling, they are the persons to whom access control may be given, even though the consent is or earlier permissions do not protect provide that kind of a consent. So when we say access control, from the information security context, we look at access control as something which is done in the interest of the organization to protect the CIA of the data, and it is determined by the information security manager. But here, even if organizationally you would ask the CIO or CISO to set the access control, he has to do what the permissions provide for. That's why the consent becomes the you can say the Bible under which the access control has to be determined. If you say access control within the organization is in department A, B, C, then that A, B, C department should be such departments which are aligned with the purposes for which the data principal has provided the permissions. Now, log monitoring, measures for business continuity, then this detection of unauthorized access appears to be something similar to DLP. Then having the legal control. These are the other things. Now, I would like your comments on this Rule 6, if you have got anything specific, any of you. Is this different from what you already know, or is it the same? Or, like what I said, whether you need to adopt the existing IS manual, or can you say if you already have an IS manual, that is sufficient? These are the issues I want some of you to actually react to.
I think.
Good evening, sir. Murugan this side.
Having it, Naavi sir.
Yeah.
If we are especially 27,001 and let us say 27,701, I think many of things are covering as we are talking about the same thing in our DGPSI. I don't see anything new over here.
Almost. Having said that, one thing is 27,001 or 2770 in very generic. Here some specific requirements are there, even if it is covering. Like 1 year is not any specific requirement for 27,001 or 27,701. This is a very specific mention about 1 year for the log, I believe.
No. 1 minute.
Things like that.
1 minute. 27,001 as Sudarshan Sarandal is here. 27,001 and 27,701 is also generic. Don't worry. It never talks about log retention need to be how many years and so on. It all based
generic.
on.
It all, here it is
generic. So
here
it
all
specific. No, coming to it. I'll come to it. But many of the organization, even though it is generic, based on why you are implementing, based on the risk assessment, based on the region where you are operating, applicable laws, standards, regulations, blah, blah, blah comes into picture. It's always more than. For example, if I have to adhere to HIPAA, 6 years locked, including my audit logs and so on. Yeah. So 27,000 also generic. So 1 year here, what they are talking about, obviously to covered is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, my question.
I think we have to clarify whatever ISO standards are there.
Yeah.
They go back to the regulations.
Yeah.
If 1 year is written in some law, 1 year is applicable even in 27,001.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or 27,701, whatever it is. It cannot have a separate requirement. It is according to the law.
Correct.
Law and other requirements. Yeah.
Yes. That's why I said it is generic 27,001. There also we are applying the specific law as applicable to me. And here obviously, yeah. Okay.
No. My question was, if an organization already has an ISMS policy applicable to all the data within this, is it necessary to have a separate reasonable security safeguards policy for PII 1? Second, when you talk of the IS4 or C1 to 27701, etc., it all depends on to which data it has been made applicable. That is, if it has been made applicable to GDPR data, or if it has been made applicable to non-personal, not to the DPDPA protected data, there may be a need to relook for this set of data which we call as the DPD data. Because here, if you look at the protection of rights, the rights are different. Okay, so that my question is, in practical scenario of an organization, should I say that I already have 25 policies in my ISMS system? Then is it necessary for me to draw, say, 6 more policies here for meeting the DPDPA requirements? How do you look at it if you are the advisor to an organization? Harish?
I think these fundamentals are...
You need to map those controls against each, each applicable law.
Mapping the ISMS control to this, or you are writing a policy for this and map the ISMS control to this?
Let me say something. See, ISMS and Privacy Information Management System, the fundamental difference is ISMS, we always look at data within the organization. The moment you go to PIMS, you look at data outside the organization. Even if they have 100 or 1,000 policies under ISMS, the data of people outside the organization is not covered. We have to have additional policies.
Good point. Yeah. Okay. So you say, yeah, I suppose I made a very good point here that,
Naavi, can I just interrupt for a minute?
yes, please.
Mr. Naavi, I mean, in some, to put it brief, can I take it that it is something like 43 of IT Act speaks about the same thing, it is something like an elongated or an elaborated description of what 43A earlier did. Since 43 has been removed.
The 43 capital A is going to be replaced. Okay.
Yeah, is replaced.
You have got the SPDA rules released in 2011, which was an elaboration of section 43 capital A reasonable security practices. Okay. So that you may use in the back end as your guidance. Now, probably you have to create a similar policy for DPDPA under Rule 6 is what I am trying to suggest. Yeah.
Sir, audible. Can you say something, sir?
Sir, Murugan this side.
Please. Yeah.
Murugan, go ahead.
Hear me, sir?
Murugan, please go ahead.
Hello, Murugan this side.
Mr. Murugan, please speak.
Murugan, you are not audible.
Sir, what I want to say is, those companies which have got ISMS,
you please raise your hand and then perhaps speak. Then it will be better. Yeah.
Naavi, sir.
Yeah.
Those companies which have got ISMS, PMS certification,
yes,
most of them they don't cover entire enterprise. The information across enterprise they don't cover. They cover only specific functions for the certification.
Yes.
That is one limitation in this context.
Yes. Yeah.
Unless they cover entire organization for the PII, what they collect the process. This ISMS have no meaning for them.
Yeah.
Comply with the DPDPA.
Yes. Okay. So there are differences.
Yeah.
Let us just understand.
That's a wrong judgment. ISMS has nothing to do with a wrong judgment. Encryption, technical safeguard, they are all covered. And GDPR or DPDPA does not give anything directly. We have to depend on ISMS for all the technical controls. As the gentleman says, the scope is only normally IT department. The business is not covered at all. Moreover, privacy is outside the organization. We are confusing. We should understand the fundamentals. ISMS was for data within the organization, within even IT department as a custodian. It was not meant for the public data. Now with privacy, we have to link it to PIMS. Okay, there it goes. You will have similar issue in AIMS, where we go outside the organization to see how public data they are training. Those issues will come. So there is a fundamental difference between analyzing ISMS and PIMS. We should not directly compare ISMS with DPDPA, except that there is a big gap in DPDPA. It says what you should do in technical safeguard. It doesn't say how we should do that. That gap is 100% filled by ISMS. That's a contribution of ISMS.
Fine. So I think for our immediate recognition, see, just as we say,
sir, my job is to defend ISMS wherever I go.
Okay. Now, what I'm just trying to point out is, just as we say that if an organization is GDPR compliant, they should not automatically assume that they are DPDPA compliant. Similarly, if an organization is already ISMS compliant, then also they should not presume that I don't have to do anything else as far as the DPDPA is concerned. They have to look at it and make use of their current implementation of ISMS, to what extent it satisfies these DPDPA requirements, and then for whatever it does not apply, then put other safeguards which may be necessary. For example, this minor data handling. Okay, that's a totally different kind of security which may be required. So while ISMS can be as a guidance for say securing the security or safeguarding the personal information protected by this DPDPA 2023. some modifications may require to be made. That is all the limited point I am making. Ramesh, are you with me?
Now, sir, Murugan this side. Can you able to hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this you're saying that access control list, suppose if the organization has an ERP package with a complete customer database and everything, okay, if they have to relook the AC account access control list based on DPDPA, it is like a revamping their ERP actually. It's not so easy job actually.
See, ease of compliance is secondary to being compliant. If their organization wants to trade off the ease of compliance, then they have to absorb the risks associated with it. See, just because ERP was already there and their system has got certain restrictions, how can we accept that whatever ERP does is the limitation of DPDPA?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
No, see, we have to see that is correct actually. Rule is correct, everything. But the problem you have to see the workload that goes into, because they have been using this ERP and because of these things to change the access control list and then put it into the testing and everything, it is a major headache for the organization.
Access
It's not so easy.
Access control may still be funneled through, let us say, DPO instead of CISO. Okay, but the DPO himself may have to create rules which are in tune with the permissions granted by each individual data principal. Now, I'm sure that your ERP system is capable of doing it, but maybe you may have to work.
See, actually, there is an organization which handles 1.5 lakhs of customer. Out of 1.5 lakhs of the customer data, okay, they have only 20% of their email ID and mobile number. And when they send a request and everything, only 2% has replied to that email ID and mobile.
Okay.
So now the organization is what to do now?
Now, okay. See, now they have to take a view on how to deal with the other data for which you are processing without consent. If you continue to process it, you will be processing it without consent, which means that you are taking the risk of non-compliance of DPDPA.
Now, see, I had sent a mail to all the customer, whoever shared their email ID and mobile. Okay, they are not replied back actually.
Okay.
So I had specified clearly they should be replying it back within 1 week. If they are not replying it up within 1 week, can I take, why not I can take it up as they are not least bothered about their data going out actually. If they are so specific, they should have replied it either by mobile or their email ID. And 50% of the email ID has bounced back actually.
I understand. Now, let me understand the views of others. Kamal, you have any view on this? This is legacy data consent is one of the important requirements of DPDPA. And whatever problem is being stated is exactly something which every organization will face. First of all, they don't have the contact emails. And even if they send, they will get back only very, very minimal response. So the option available to the organization is to continue processing under whatever Mr. Murugan is saying, and perhaps take the risk, or take the decision that after a reasonable period, I will purge the data and then debate what should be the reasonable period. Now, if you are looking at commenting on these rules, there is a rule which talks about deletion of data after 3 years for certain class of data processing, like e-commerce, gaming, or social media intermediary. But it is not there for everybody else. Does it mean that even the normal data fiduciaries who do not fall under that e-commerce, etc., the 3 years limit is to be considered, or the ITA Act 2000 considers 1 year as the limit after which privacy policies have to be renewed. So if after 1 year, if it is not renewed, it becomes non-compliance of ITA 2000. or going by the DPDPA principles, when permission is given for a purpose, when the purpose is over, there is an obligation on the data fiduciary to delete and erase data even without the, at least stop processing the data without the data principal coming back to you with a withdrawal report or something like that. So this is the option. Now, let me get the views of all these experts and then see.
I think, Naavi sir, one of the director has said, why don't we publish it up in the newspaper?
Yes.
Okay, our organization has these customer things and everything. We had sent a mail and everything. Whoever we are not responding it up, reply back and everything. We are considering it up. You are not worried about your privacy of your data, full stop, and then we'll start processing it actually.
Okay. Anyway,
Sir,
yes, please.
in
Go
our
ahead.
banking ware example,
Yeah.
for example, a person not using his online banking for say 3 months time, it becomes inactive.
Yes.
When the fund comes back and the request for investment, they deactivate it. Similar way, here
Yes.
also, if they are not responding to the notice,
Yes.
in 3 months or 180 days, how do you stop it? You don't act upon the data for any purpose.
This
And
is
then
what.
the client come back and tell you.
Agreed. This is what we are suggesting under DGPSI. We are trying to, like in the bank account, we have dormant, inoperative, and then after 5 years of inoperative, send it to the government or something like that. Here also, we are suggesting that the processing needs to be deactivated after a short period. But you may not delete it, but processing must stop. Then after a particular period of time, I have been suggesting the government to keep a repository of such unclaimed data, and then the data fiduciary should be allowed to put it, transfer it to that kind of a government archival of personal data, so that like in the bank deposits after 5 years of going into inoperative account, we actually pass it and transfer it to the government. Am I correct, Adepo? And it government may use that data, money, or it may be remaining there as unclaimed deposits. So similar, process has to be thought of for the data. Personal data also is one of the suggestions which we can look at. But assuming that if a person does not respond, we can assume it as a presumption of consent to continue, does not go with the principle of this opt-in, opt-out kind of a principle, no?
So can I use it for analysis purpose? See, I may not use it for, can I use it for analysis?
You want to use it for analysis, you can do it with anonymized information. So one thing you can do is after the not receiving any consent or something like that, you still stop processing it as an identified data, but make it as a de-identified data or pseudonymized data or even anonymized data, and then afterwards apply the principles of secured processing of anonymized data. So for analysis, for big data purpose, that is sufficient. So for actual active processing, for providing a service, it may be okay if you stop the processing and you can, as Adepo was suggesting, deactivate the customer's account, subject to possibility of reviving within some period of time. It may be 1 year, maybe 2 years or something like that. Before deletion, which is let us say 3 years, the rule also provides that within 48 hours of final deletion, one more notice has to be sent. So at that time again, if the person comes back and says, no, don't delete it, then it can be revived. So like as we do in the Limitation Act, 3 years from the last use is the date on which you actually go in for deletion. But before that, you can always put it in some kind of a secured archival mode, similar to this inoperative account, because when an account goes into inoperative, then there are certain restrictions placed on reactivating it. Similarly, we can do it here also. Okay.
Yeah, when I presented this DPDPA, one of the directors said, once we thought data is a oil, now it has become a big headache to the business actually.
Yeah, I sometimes make it, yeah, give an example of inventory we'll have of hazardous chemicals. Okay. Now, hazardous inventory is a headache because you need to have very special security, because if something goes wrong, like let us say the Bhopal gas tragedy, you should be have a possibility of having liabilities would be there. So personal data is also like a hazardous asset. It has to be protected in a particular manner. You cannot think of only enjoying it without investing in the security. Correct? Yeah. Any other point anybody would like to make on this reasonable security safeguards?
Sir,
I have some few points to add.
Yeah.
By merely trying to contact by email, you cannot feel that you need not take their permission. They are now more available. There are other means which you should try to attempt. You should, if you have his personal address, you should write to them and try to get that. Why email? When he transacted with you, he may not have the email. Even his email might have been changed. But it doesn't transfer the right to you. You have to take a fair consent. Fair
Correct.
consent means you should make all attempts to reach him. In case if you are not able to meet that, it doesn't absolve, it will not give powers to you to take unilaterally to use his and process his information.
So that is the
Either
question,
you should
sir.
delete as not required, or if the data is very, very important, there must be archival.
No,
We should send it to the archival for preservation.
ISO treats it in a different way, sir. There is a standard called ISO 29184, where there is a template given on privacy notice. On the website, you need a privacy policy. You also need a privacy notice and consent, it says. The moment you publish it according to the specification in the standard, automatically you are absolved of all other things. It means a consent.
Okay. Now, Ravindra,
I don't know how DPDA deals with this.
No, DPDPA, ultimately the liability is at the discretion of the inquiry committee. Okay.
Okay.
So, you can always say that I did in good faith, I implemented this standard, that standard, but ultimately it is left to the board to decide whether it was adequate, sufficient in the particular context. Okay, because it's a legal thing, and even if DPP takes a decision, people may go on an appeal to the TD SAT.
That is true. Now, my point is, instead of saying I sent 2 lakh emails, only 2% result, instead of the frustration, I am saying there is a solution in ISO.
Agreed.
If you follow the template, you are very much assured that it is as good as a consent.
Yeah, you also put up a notice, but the point is whether you can presume consent when there is a lack of response. Okay, Ravindra Patil.
That is what it says. The standard was prepared for that sake.
But I don't
want to publish it. Is it as good as consent?
No, I don't think privacy.
No, but what happened to the legacy data? See, problem is there for the legacy data.
Correct. That's what we are discussing now. Say now what Sudarshan says is that under ISO, a consent like what he said, a privacy notice should be sufficient. But in privacy, when we say you have to have a specific opt-in for each consent statement, it automatically means that you cannot presume consent and then say that because you did not tick a particular thing, I assume that you are accepting that. That argument does not hold good in the privacy scenario.
Yeah. No, it holds good, sir. And that's what that is. I think we have a difference of opinion. Even if we look at GDPR, if it requires too much of effort, then we can waive. It's a general clause is there in GDPR. Even PDPA should have that. I'm not very sure.
When it comes to the FMCG organization, we have to think of lakhs and lakhs of customer data they have. Okay, I think some consideration should be there.
No, fine. Now that is a suggestion which if you want to articulate
yes, correct.
suggestion, you can do that. Okay, that is the object of our discussions now in this particular stage. Okay.
It's called 29184. You can go and search on the net.
Yeah.
Anyone? No? Okay.
Yeah. Ravindra Patil, you have got something?
Sir, see, the discussion, what I am gathering from entire discussion is, sir, one thing is data fiduciary, there will be number of them, right? Why they should hold the data which is irrelevant, dormant, correct? You can define a period for 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year. After that, they can discard, from a data minimalization point of view. Correct? Yeah. It is all floating population. If there is a e-commerce one, maybe for one time he is buying and he has to register or he has to provide certain information. After that, he may not need it. And even if the contact details would have changed, he would have changed the residence, he would have changed the email ID or mobile number. Why you want to hold that data? And second thing to Mr. Murugan's point, can we use it for processing? With dormant data, what detail? What you will, build value out of? Hardly anything. So if we can actually consider holding that data for a period of time, because it is not a government record, it is just a fiduciary who is holding the data for a period of time. That's my observation.
Okay, I think we should move to the next one now. We'll come back to more discussions if it is required. Okay. Now, Rule 7 is about data breach notification, where the time period, one is who are the persons to whom data breach has to be notified. Of course, it says data principal as well as the data protection board. This is as per the act itself. It cannot be changed. Now, the rule says that there has to be an immediate report, which obviously would be a provisional report without knowing full details of the breach. That immediate report has to be given. And then within 72 hours, a more detailed report has to be given. Now, the organization needs to decide whether that immediate report, when do you give that immediate report? Because when a data breach is noticed as an incident, we are first having a suspected data breach. Now, should we classify an incident as suspected data breach, which needs to be briefly evaluated and confirmed, and then it is to become the considered as data breach? Because the law simply says when an organization becomes aware of a data breach, then this liability for notification comes. That being aware, there is no further clarity. So as a legal professional, I can interpret it in any manner. Even the first instance itself, I can say you are aware. But this awareness, is there any degree of certainty with which you should be aware that a breach has happened or not, needs to be discussed. And maybe this is something which we can see whether further clarification is required. Otherwise, 72 hours is there, and then certain actually suggests 6 hours. So immediate reporting and detailed reporting later on, and with facility to ask the board for additional time if it is required. That is okay as far as the notification period is concerned. But this definition of when does an organization considers itself as aware, is it when somebody raises an alarm, or when that alarm is evaluated by the DPO and confirmed that yes, there is a suspected data breach? We may not know how many data has been breached, what details have been breached, etc. But I know that something has happened. So that is when this definition of awareness becomes important. And unless you know whose data has been affected, you may not be able to send the notice to the data principal. Of course, you can send a notice to the data protection board saying that undisclosed number of my data principals data has been compromised. But unless you know whose data has been compromised, you cannot send a notice to that respective data principle. So whether we need this kind of a clarification in this is something which we can look at when we make comments. Okay. I think I discussed this time for deletion. There is a 3-year limit which has been given for e-commerce companies, online gaming and social media intermediaries. Out of this, they also put in a volume consideration that e-commerce companies with more than 2 crores registered customers in India, gaming companies with more than 50 lakh customers are data principals, and social media intermediaries with more than 2 crores. So for data, e-commerce companies and social media intermediaries, it says that if the organization has got more than 2 crore data principals and a particular data has not been used for last 3 years, then by giving a 48-hour notice, you may be able to delete it. This is similar to the limitation period in law. In the case of online gaming, they have reduced the volume to 50 lakhs. Okay. Now, whether this is an indication for other kinds of data is what we can separately debate. Okay.
Any input on FMCG companies?
See, that is a customer's data, personal data you're having, you're doing market profiling. So you are actually using that data. So if you are holding the data as legacy data, which can run into millions in a organization like Hindustan Liver or somebody like that, it is a tough decision you have to take. Will the marketing manager will agree for you to delete say 10 million data which you have acquired so seriously over the last 10, 15, 20 years? That is something which you need to look at. So
because it doesn't come under e-commerce, doesn't come under online, and doesn't come under social media.
They may come under e-commerce if they are having online sales. Okay. But
I had once upon a time online sales. I am not presently having it up with the customer. It's a legacy data.
2 crores and this particular schedule may not apply in such case. You have to take an independent decision. If the purpose for which the data was given is no longer relevant, then you have to take a view whether I should keep it or not. As Ravindra was mentioning, the value of personal data starts depreciating as it becomes older and older. So just as I was also giving the example of this hazardous chemical, now if you have acquired a hazardous chemical at one point of time, it is there in your godown, but now for last 2 years you have not used it, then the question you have to answer is it necessary for me to continue to hold that and take the risk of its protection rather than discarding it, even throwing it away if it is possible, or selling it back or something of that nature, just to prevent any adverse consequences. Similarly, this old data, which may not be accurate, which may not have the same value when it was, say, current, is there an economic reason to hold it and run the risk of hacking or something like that? Is a management decision you have to initiate. If it is possible to anonymize
something. Ravi, what you said is something like the expiry date of a poison is over. Still, it is a poison or a non-poison is a question. Actually, similarly like that. Thank you, Naavi.
Yeah. Okay. So some of these things, it's a management discretion you have to take. Okay. Rule number 9 is about providing the business contact, which is straightforward, except that I consider this as an acceptance under the Indian law that there is something called business contact, which is different from the personal data. So business contact can be published. Maybe in this case it is of the DPO, but still an employee's business contact can be published, means that business contact is not necessarily to be considered as equivalent to any other personal data. What is business contact? There is no definition. except that any contact information which the data principal wants to say use for business purposes should be called as business contact. If I have got an email address and I say I want you to give me back a business proposal to this particular email address, then is it not correct for me to say that that email address I am opting to use as a business contact? So by my choice as a data principal, I am declaring a particular email as a business contact, and by the privacy principles, I am the ultimate, person who has to decide what is personal, what is non-personal, what is public, what is business. So I feel that it is the data principal who decides what is a business contact, what is not a business contact. We cannot say that anything at Gmail is a personal email, anything at a domain is a business email. So that kind of classification is not very, very advisable. Okay. So
Naavi sir, one more, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
My mobile number given by Airtel. Okay. For Airtel, my mobile number, what type of data? Is it a personal data or what? Can I put a consent to the Airtel that my mobile number should take calls only from local, not international or any crime related things? If I give a consent, will the Airtel will take it?
They should take it. Say they are getting into a transaction with you. Okay. The mobile number is a transaction data on which there are some rights for Airtel, some rights for you. Now, if you want to restrict, like your DND register, you are restricting the use in a particular manner. Maybe so far TRAI has not discussed about this international calls, but of course in landlines we did have that kind of a thing of locking, and in credit cards we have a system of blocking international transaction. So there is no reason why we should not have a similar provision for which TRAI has to take a decision.
So you mean to say that Airtel should now take consent from all the subscriber?
No, one minute. When you take a credit card, okay, they give you an option either going to the website or something to actually fix a limit for local transaction, whether you want this NFC transaction or not, whether you want the e-commerce transaction, whether you want international e-commerce sites. These are given as options. This is a good system where the data principal is, or the user of the service is given the option to choose certain specific types of services. Maybe that principle has not yet percolated into TRAI, but you are raising a good point where TRAI may provide this kind of an option. Then Airtel at the time of registering the same, and then maybe subsequently in the account, they may say that you can decide. Many times you can deposit the SIM card for a month or two for various reasons. No, so it's like that they can introduce such a system. I think it has escaped the mind of TRAI. It is a good suggestion which we have to see whether it can be implemented by TRAI.
Actually, in practice, now we don't feel it will be highly difficult in practice to implement, because without receiving the calls, we will not know what is going to be the nature of the call. See, DND is a different thing. DND means
that is your decision.
Receiving the call are prohibited. But what Murugan says is about the nature of the call. How will I know what will be the nature of the call?
But it is your decision, no? Even today we block certain calls. Sometimes we may not know. We just look at the Truecaller identity. If it says spam, we may block it. So it is the choice of the individual. So difficulty is not an excuse for compliance. One. Now, in the technology world, nothing is really difficult. Okay. Now, if an international call lands onto the local I'm sure that there are ways by which the network will detect that it is originated from an international source, and it can be stopped. Okay, so it's all a question of looking at the There must be some telecom people here. I feel it is not an impossibility, but it may involve a cost, it may involve some changes to be made, and that is something which is likely to happen as we.
Sir, Naavi sir, just clarify me. Suppose if while giving a consent to the Airtel, okay, during using my number, any fraud happens, okay, you are responsible for that. Shall I put it consent like that to the Airtel?
Blanket thing like that may not be accepted because we do not know.
I'm giving a consent, no, that you should not use my number for any of the fraudulent things, crimes and everything.
Airtel will simply bow you down and say, don't use my number.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
That indemnity or guarantee, but if you say, I don't want this particular number or something like that, or from one network, okay, nothing from Jamtara should come to me, something like that, that is possible to be implemented, but you cannot make them take the indemnity for any kind of a fraud, I suppose. Yeah. Okay.
Sir.
Yeah.
Telecom companies don't charge for incoming calls. So they don't do anything on that.
But the system or the network has to actually recognize the incoming call. Even if you don't.
They recognize it. But they have to incur investment for the facility to enable. Not like banking.
Whether they have interest or monetary thing, they have to.
Yeah. So investment and cost is not an excuse for compliance. Take that as a burden. Okay.
So Naavi sir, if you say investment and cost, difficulties, okay, and all those things cannot be taken as an excuse, then it's a very difficult FMCG companies and everything to go about. Just a thought process.
Agreed. Yeah. Fine. They are all making millions of rupees profit, no? Some profit.
See, I am unable to understand. Most of the MCGs, FMCGs are international companies. They are already implementing it. Why they should be hesitating now to comply with the Indian law? They are complying to the much tough laws across the globe. Why India? When it comes to India, we find it unnecessarily put into brakes. It is not. It's totally a false propaganda they are trying to.
We have got another 10 minutes. So we'll try to at least run through the remaining things and then go back to the discussions. Okay. Now, this minors or disabled data handling is another critical area. But now I think government has also realized that there is a need to use Aadhaar for this age gating. And with that, this minor verifying whether a person is a minor or not. If so, what is his date of birth and who is his guardian? All that we can build services around the use of Aadhaar. And probably that is how we will be having new services related to this. But once a person is identified as a minor, the consent has to come from the guardian, and that has to be switched back to the erstwhile minor after he attains majority. So the whole system has to be built on that. So I think that's a matter of detailing of the procedure for handling minors. For disabled data principle, there has to be a means of collecting that information. But I think we have solutions very shortly. We will be having such solutions in the marketplace. Okay, so an organization may have to spend money for such software. But a software, whether a person is a minor or not, whether he is a disabled person for whom a court anywhere in the corner of India has appointed a guardian, that can be filtered directly at the consent stage. And hopefully within a month or so, we will be perhaps talking about solutions for that. Okay. Then once it is identified, we also have the need to monitor that there is no behavioral monitoring, there is no tracking targeted advertising. Now, for that, this Rule 11 says that there could be some exemptions like clinical establishments, mental health establishments, healthcare professionals, educational institutions, these are the organizations for whom this restriction on behavioral monitoring is not applicable. I may not be sure that that exception can be used for targeted advertising. It is used for, it can be used for securing the minor for the purpose of securing the minor's interest. If you need to monitor the person, that is exempted under Rule 11 for specific organizations like clinical establishments, educational institutions, including creche, child care center, and so on. Okay. Then, as far as the significant data fiduciary, the rule 22 has provided for MITI designating an officer of the ministry who can issue some clarifications on what class of data fiduciaries should be considered as a significant data fiduciary. It is something which was not there earlier. It's a new thing. And once that is there, then the data protection impact assessment and the annual audit is prescribed under this Rule 12. At present, it appears that they are not distinguishing much between DPIA and the audit, and they have indicated this period of 1 year. Probably they have to segregate this and say DPIA needs to be conducted whenever a process which requires processing of sensitive data is required, not necessarily once in a year, whereas annual data audit is different. Okay. Then rights protection is access request, deletion request, grievance redressal, and nomination. This complete set is a very interesting proposition in terms of designing the systems. Maybe when we go into more details of that in a particular given context, we will be able to explain it further. But DSAR is already common in the GDPR area. In the case of deletion, we have to check whether there is a need to retain under any other law. So, because right to forget kind of a right is not given in India. It is a right to erasure, which is slightly weaker right. Grievance redressal is to be mentioned as an important right. And then this nomination, which has got its own issue, because nomination, the nominee has to be identified at the time of obtaining the consent, and then you have to identify when that nomination becomes effective, that is when the person dies, and then at that time again you identify the nominee and then transfer the custody of the personal data to him. So this is something which data fiduciary may presently have. So this is a new thing which you have to do. Then rule number 15 is similar to the earlier government processing the data without consent for a specific purpose if they follow the principles of privacy. Similar thing is given that when data is given for research, which is often the de-identified or anonymized data, it can be processed without consent. If it is processed in a lawful manner, it uses for a specific purpose, and then only minimal data is used, etc. Okay, but reasonable security safeguards are still required. Okay, in certain cases, maybe an intimation to the data principal is required, particularly if it is not an anonymized data. We have a rule 16 and 17 and even 18. They are all related to the choosing of the board chairman, members, and then what should be the employee's salary, etc. So that we don't need to discuss in detail. One aspect of this functioning, which is very relevant for us, is the rules recommend that the board shall function as a digital office, which means that there is a mandate that they use digital means for contacting the data principals, even to conduct inquiries. So I skip these terms of appointment. As far as the appeal is concerned, appeal goes to TDSAT. this rule actually only the first paragraph is relevant. Once you say that the appeal authority is TDSAT, we don't have to prescribe the rules relating to how the TDSAT needs to have procedures for having the appeal. In fact, this actually mandates TDSAT to actually receive the applications in digital form, which I don't know whether TDSAT is today ready. Maybe in due course, either TDSAT will adapt itself to meet the requirements of this rule, or the rule may have to be altered. Rule 22 suggests that the government will appoint multiple officials. Those officials or a committee will be responsible for for the significant data fiduciary classification and for deciding about the security exceptions and so on. So they have retained a sort of an empowerment to make any changes. Okay, so this is the set of rules which the government has notified. The schedules have got some more details. I think we should stop today's discussion here. A few questions if it is there.
Yeah, Naavi sir, sorry to disturb once again. Yeah. Is a Xerox company, okay, shop, okay, is coming under this DPDPA?
I can only say that it's not exempted under DPDPA.
Okay, why? Because one of the situation, personal data of a health information, the person has given to the organization. Before giving to the organization, he went and took a photocopy. Okay, that Xerox fellow has leaked it out actually, because today's Xerox machine is having storage capacity. He stored it and leaked it actually. Okay, now this data principle says that it is this person has leaked it out, that organization is leaked it out, not this Xerox person actually.
Okay, that is a matter of investigation. But see, there are specific agents who run around these Xerox shops, collect this information and make payment to them. This is a
exactly
data, in whatever dump, what do you call it?
The Xerox person, the owner of the Xerox shop itself doesn't know that the data is getting stored and everything. When it comes for the maintenance purpose, okay, this fellow copies this data and goes away actually.
Understand. So it means that, see, it's not only the Xerox shops, even the pharmacies and others, these are small entities who need this awareness of this act and the responsibilities on them. Okay, so probably we need
Thank you, Naavi. I think we have to educate all these Xerox things by government and everything. Thank you.